The cameras were still rolling when Prince Harry lowered his head, his voice breaking into a trembling whisper that stunned the world. "They're not mine," he said. The studio fell silent. You could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of papers from a nervous producer off stage, and the quiet gasp from the host who hadn't expected this confession. For a moment, no one knew if it was real. The world stopped breathing. Millions watched, replaying that sentence over and over again, as if trying to make sense of what they had just heard. What did he mean? Who wasn't his? And why did Meghan Markle, sitting a few feet away, look like she'd seen a ghost? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The confession wasn't part of the script. It wasn't planned. This was supposed to be a feel-good interview about philanthropy, family, and the couple's new life away from royal pressure. Instead, it became the most shocking live television moment in modern royal history. The cameras captured something raw. A man who had spent years defending the people he loved most, suddenly breaking under the weight of a truth too heavy to hide any longer. Imagine that scene. Prince Harry, a man who grew up under the world's gaze, breaking down not in a palace or courtroom, but in front of millions of strangers. Tears streaked down his cheeks as he reached for a glass of water. Meghan's smile, that perfectly measured public smile, vanished. She tried to interject, but the words froze on her lips. What happened next would ignite a storm so powerful that even Buckingham Palace couldn't contain it. But before we go there, let's rewind. Let's understand what led to that moment. The tension, the whispers, the lies, and the unbearable truth Harry could no longer carry. Because to grasp why this confession matters, you have to look beyond the palace walls, beyond the tabloids, beyond the surface of royal drama. This wasn't just about one man's heartbreak. It was about identity, betrayal, and the unraveling of an illusion that had fooled an entire world. For years, the world saw the image of a happy royal family. Harry and Meghan walking hand in hand under California sunlight, Archie toddling in the garden, Lillibet's first birthday photo going viral with headlines celebrating a modern royal fairy tale. But if you looked closer, something was off. Little inconsistencies, tiny cracks, questions that were quietly asked but never answered. Why were the birth records sealed? Why was there no official hospital footage for either child? Why did the palace avoid confirming even the simplest details? The public assumed it was privacy. After all, Harry and Meghan had made it clear they wanted to protect their children from media intrusion. But insiders whispered a different story. There were too many gaps, too many unusual restrictions, and too many nervous glances whenever those children were mentioned. Some royal aides reportedly said the atmosphere during Meghan's pregnancies was tense and unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Staff who handled royal documentation described disappearing paperwork, altered schedules, and unusual security protocols around medical appointments. Something wasn't right. And yet, through all of it, Harry smiled. He defended Meghan fiercely, calling out the press for cruelty and racism, accusing the monarchy of institutional neglect. He painted himself as a husband and father who just wanted to protect his family. But behind the public statements and PR appearances, friends noticed something changing. Harry became distant, paranoid, and emotionally volatile. Some described him as haunted. Others said he was obsessed with truth, a truth no one dared to speak. When the live TV interview was announced, everyone expected a new chapter, a chance for the couple to rebuild their image after years of public scrutiny. It was meant to be uplifting, safe, scripted. But anyone who knew Harry well knew that he was never good at hiding emotion. He was, at his core, Diana's son, impulsive, emotional, and often too honest for his own good. So when the interviewer casually asked about his children, a simple, innocent question, it hit him like a thunderbolt. You could see it in his eyes, the flicker of pain, the hesitation before he spoke, and then the tears. "Are you okay, Harry?" the host asked, sensing the change in tone. He took a deep breath. "No," he said softly. "No, I'm not." That's when the world stopped smiling. For the first time, Harry didn't speak like a prince. He spoke like a broken man. A man trapped between what he was told to believe and what he had discovered. A man who could no longer keep up the illusion. He spoke about love, trust, and betrayal. About realizing that sometimes, The people you die for are the same people who destroy you from the inside. He didn't name names, not yet. But his words were drenched in sorrow. I thought being a father would save me, he said. But now I don't even know who I am anymore. In the control room, producers panicked. Do they cut the feed? Do they let him continue? Meghan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, crossing her legs, gripping her dress. The host tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but Harry wasn't finished. He was shaking. The cameras zoomed closer, almost uncomfortably so, capturing the rawness of his breakdown. The room felt like it was suffocating under the weight of what wasn't being said. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't just emotional exhaustion. It was confession. It was truth clawing its way out. People watching at home took to social media instantly. What's wrong with Harry? One viewer posted. Is he saying what I think he's saying? Another wrote. Within minutes, the clip began trending worldwide. But even those who saw it live had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole went. Because behind that confession was a story years in the making, one filled with secrecy, manipulation, and a desperate struggle to protect a lie too big to hide. So how did it all begin? Why would a man like Harry, who has spent his entire life in the public eye, risk everything, his marriage, his reputation, his children's privacy, to speak these words? And what truth could possibly be so devastating that even Meghan Markle, known for her composure and control, couldn't stop him from saying it? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning, back to when Meghan was first pregnant, or at least, that's what the world was told. There were smiling photos, official announcements, glowing headlines. But there were also inconsistencies that didn't fit. Meghan's baby bump seemed to change shape from week to week, sometimes appearing larger, sometimes smaller. There were rumors about her avoiding certain medical staff and using private clinics with restricted access. Some journalists who tried to confirm her medical team were met with silence or legal threats. Even palace insiders admitted they were kept in the dark. But Harry defended her fiercely. Every time someone raised a question, he doubled down. Leave my wife alone, he'd snap. She's been through enough. But that defensiveness wasn't just about protecting Meghan from public attacks. It was something deeper, something he was trying to convince himself of. As months turned into years, those close to the couple noticed another pattern. Harry began isolating himself. Friends from the army, old palace staff, even members of his own family, all pushed away. Meghan became his world, and the children, at least in his mind, were proof that love had conquered everything. But the cracks started showing. Photos of Archie's christening looked oddly staged. Official announcements were delayed. Even close relatives admitted they hadn't seen the child in person. When Lillibet was born, the secrecy doubled. There were no hospital sightings, no witnesses, and no verified documents. Still, Harry stayed silent, until recently. When he began doing interviews again, something in his tone had shifted. There was bitterness, regret, and sadness behind the smiles. And those who knew him best say that the change came after one discovery, something he found, or something that was shown to him, that made him question everything. That's why this story matters now. Because what happened on live television wasn't an accident. It was the result of years of emotional buildup, sleepless nights, and a truth that could no longer be hidden. Harry wasn't just confessing his pain. He was exposing a lie that could shake the foundation of royal lineage itself. If what he said is true, if Archie and Lillibet aren't biologically his, then the monarchy's bloodline, the succession, and even the legal standing of certain royal privileges could be called into question. It's not just scandal. It's history rewriting itself in real time. The world has always been fascinated by royal secrets. But this hits differently. Because at its core, it's about love, betrayal, and the unbearable cost of silence. It's about a man torn between loyalty and truth. A father who no longer knows if the children he tucked into bed were ever truly his. And a wife whose secrets might finally have caught up to her. Now the world waits. The palace remains silent. Meghan's team refuses to comment. But people are asking questions louder than ever before. Who are Archie and Lillibet? Where were they really born? And why does every trail of evidence seem to end in a dead end? Harry's confession might have been spontaneous, but it wasn't meaningless. He was trying to tell us something the world wasn't supposed to hear, something he's been carrying alone for far too long. His tears weren't just about heartbreak, they were about liberation. A man finally freeing himself from a lie that's been eating him alive. But the question remains, what truth did he discover that finally broke him? And why now? The answer begins with the interview itself. The one that changed everything. The moment a single innocent question turned into the confession that would shake the monarchy. Because when the interviewer leaned forward and asked, "How have your children changed your life?" Harry paused. The cameras caught that pause. It was long, heavy, and when he finally spoke, the words didn't come out rehearsed or polished. They came out trembling. They made me realize I've been living a lie. The audience gasped. Meghan froze. And at that moment, every single person watching knew something monumental had just begun. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon broadcast, a charity special filmed in Los Angeles with soft lighting, friendly banter, and just enough sincerity to melt the hearts of viewers across the world. The show's producers had planned everything down to the last second. The cue cards, the laughter breaks, the camera angles that would capture Harry and Meghan's unbreakable bond. What they didn't plan for was the silence that followed a single, devastating question. When the interviewer leaned forward with that smile, the one that says, "I'm about to make you emotional for the camera," Harry seemed relaxed. Meghan crossed her legs, brushed an invisible speck from her dress, and smiled sweetly. The audience was warm. The lights were flattering. It was supposed to be safe. And then the question dropped. "How have your children changed you, Harry?" It was a harmless question. Innocent, even. The kind every celebrity parent answers with a laugh and a few lines about joy, patience, or bedtime chaos. But for Harry, it wasn't harmless. It was a dagger wrapped in velvet. At first, he smiled. Or tried to. The corners of his lips twitched like they were fighting gravity. Then came the pause. That strange, heavy silence that producers dread and psychologists dissect. His eyes darted briefly toward Meghan. For a moment, she looked back. That split-second exchange between two people who suddenly realize that the world is watching and the truth is about to escape. Harry's throat moved as if he were swallowing glass. He reached for his water, but his hand trembled so violently that the glass clinked against the table. The host chuckled awkwardly. "Tough question, huh?" Harry didn't laugh. He stared at the floor. And then, as if the dam inside him finally cracked, he whispered something no one expected to hear. "They changed everything." He stopped again, his voice almost shaking. "They made me realize." The host leaned closer. "Yes." Harry looked up, his eyes red, glistening with tears. "They made me realize I've been living a lie." The silence that followed could have swallowed the room whole. No one spoke. No one moved. Meghan's face froze into that half-smile, half-frown expression that only appears when panic meets pride. The audience glanced at each other, unsure if they were witnessing a performance or a breakdown. The producers in the control room scrambled. Cut to commercial? Zoom out? Dim the mic? But no one dared interrupt. Harry wasn't finished. His voice cracked as he continued. "For years, I've tried to protect my family. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought love was enough." The host shifted uncomfortably, glancing off camera for direction. But the look in Harry's eyes, that hollow, haunted look, said it all. This wasn't acting. This wasn't another PR stunt. This was a man unraveling on live television. You could feel the tension in Meghan's posture. She sat rigid, hands clasped tightly, nails digging into her palm. She tried to interrupt. "What Harry means is," but he raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. "No," he said quietly. "Let me finish." The audience leaned in. The cameras zoomed closer. Every second felt like a lifetime. And then he said it. "They're not mine." The words hung in the air, heavier than lead. The host blinked, stammered, unsure what to say. I'm sorry, what do you mean?" Harry didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes, pressing his fingers against his temples, fighting back tears. The live feed caught everything. The twitch in his jaw, the deep breath, the heartbreak. Meghan's face turned pale. She whispered something under her breath, but her mic picked it up. Not here. Not now. But it was too late. Across the world, social media exploded. Within minutes, hashtags like #HarryBreakdown and #RoyalBombshell began trending. News outlets scrambled to clip the footage. Palisades were reportedly alerted mid-broadcast. And yet, in that moment, none of it mattered to Harry. He wasn't thinking about the fallout. He was thinking about the years of silence that had led him here. When he finally spoke again, his voice was steady, eerily so. "They're not mine," he repeated, each word sharper than the last. "And I can't pretend anymore." The host swallowed hard. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I was lied to," Harry interrupted. "I'm saying everything I thought I knew about my family might not be true." Meghan shifted in her seat. The camera caught her biting her lip, the mask of calm beginning to crack. She reached for Harry's arm, whispering, "Please, stop." But he didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on something far away, something invisible to everyone but him. "I believed in love," he continued. "I believed in family. But sometimes, love isn't what you think it is." The host tried to regain control of the conversation, smiling awkwardly for the audience. "We understand emotions run high." "No," Harry said again. "You don't understand. You can't." That was the moment the control room finally cut to a commercial break. Viewers at home saw the screen fade to black. But in the studio, chaos erupted. Meghan stood up, furious, whispering harshly at Harry. Crew members rushed onto the set, trying to calm them down. One producer shouted, "We're still live in some regions." Another yelled for security to clear the audience. But Harry wasn't angry. He was numb. He sat there, staring into nothing, tears streaming down his face. A royal aide who later spoke anonymously said it was the most human they'd ever seen him. A man finally collapsing under the weight of secrets. Meghan tried to pull him toward the exit, but he wouldn't move. He just whispered something repeatedly under his breath. The aide couldn't hear all of it, but one phrase stood out. "It's over." When the show returned from commercial, the cameras avoided close-ups. The host nervously thanked everyone for tuning in and promised a beautiful discussion on parenthood later in the program. But everyone watching knew the damage was already done. Clips of the interview went viral within hours. Pundits debated whether Harry had been manipulated, exhausted, or simply overwhelmed. Others wondered if this was the prelude to a royal crisis, something that could shake the monarchy to its core. Some called it a meltdown. Others called it the truth finally breaking free. And yet, the question that echoed everywhere was simple. What did Harry mean by "they're not mine"? To find out, the world began digging. Journalists, fans, even former palace insiders. People started replaying old footage, analyzing every detail, every photo, every statement. And what they found only deepened the mystery. Because this wasn't the first time Harry had shown cracks in the facade. Months earlier, during a podcast interview, he had spoken cryptically about fatherhood teaching him unexpected lessons about identity and honesty. Another time, he mentioned trust being the hardest part of family life. At the time, no one thought much of it. But now, those words sounded like hidden cries for help. Even palace sources, usually tight-lipped, began to whisper. One senior aide reportedly told a journalist off record, "We've known something was wrong for a long time. We just didn't know how bad." That night, after the broadcast, Harry was nowhere to be found. Reporters camped outside his Montecito home saw security vehicles come and go, but no sign of the couple. Meghan's team issued a short statement saying Harry was emotionally overwhelmed and taking time for reflection. But insiders said otherwise. According to one friend, Harry left the house that night and stayed at a hotel near Santa Barbara. Alone. People close to him say he spent hours staring at the ocean, replaying everything he'd said. He wasn't just scared of the fallout. He was scared of what came next. Because once you tell the truth, you can't go back. Meanwhile, back in London, Buckingham Palace held an emergency meeting. Advisors watched the footage in stunned silence. Charles reportedly slammed his hand on the table, muttering, "He's lost his mind." William, according to insiders, was pale and quiet, saying only, "He's gone too far this time." But beneath the outrage, there was fear. Because if Harry's words were true, the implications were catastrophic. The legitimacy of the royal bloodline, the question of succession, the very foundation of the monarchy's image, all suddenly in doubt. And the worst part? This wasn't some tabloid rumor. This was a prince, on live television, declaring that his children weren't his. Over the next 24 hours, speculation reached fever pitch. News anchors replayed the clip endlessly. Psychologists analyzed his body language. Social media was flooded with theories, from secret surrogacy to royal cover-ups. Some people believed Harry was having a breakdown. Others believed he'd been silenced for years and had finally snapped. But one question loomed above all the noise. What truth had driven Harry to this point? Insiders claimed that what happened on live TV wasn't spontaneous. It was the result of weeks, maybe months, of emotional buildup. Harry had been battling inner turmoil, guilt, and doubt. Something had happened behind closed doors. Something that made him question everything about his marriage and his family. And that something, as we'll soon uncover, began when an old palace aide reached out with a warning, one that would pull Harry into a secret darker than anything he could have imagined. Because when the broadcast ended and the lights dimmed, Harry received a message on his phone that made his blood run cold. It simply read, "You were right to tell the truth. Now be ready for what comes next." But what came next would change everything, and no one, not even Harry, was prepared for it. The message appeared on Harry's phone like a ghost from the past. No name, no context, just 12 chilling words. "You were right to tell the truth. Now be ready for what comes next." He stared at it for a long time, the glow of the screen reflecting off his tear-stained face. Outside the hotel window, the California night was calm, but inside Harry's chest, a storm was brewing. His confession had gone viral. His words had already reached every newsroom, every palace corridor, every royal insider. There was no taking it back. Across the Atlantic, Buckingham Palace was in chaos. Within an hour of the interview airing in the UK, the palace switchboard was flooded with calls. Advisors were woken from sleep. News crews gathered outside the gates. The royal family's most feared word echoed through the marble halls: crisis. In the palace's private quarters, lights flickered on one after another. Senior aides rushed into emergency conference rooms, phones pressed to their ears. On one call, a weary press officer muttered, "We can't spin this. It's on camera. It's everywhere." Another whispered, "He's just accused his wife of lying about their children. How do we contain that?" But this wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was an existential threat. Because if Harry's words were true, if his children weren't biologically his, then questions about royal lineage, titles, and inheritance would follow. The monarchy wasn't built for this kind of scandal. It survived affairs, divorces, and tragedies, but never something that struck at its bloodline. Charles, still in his dressing gown, sat silently at the head of the table. Advisors read excerpts from the transcript. When they reached the line, "They're not mine," he rubbed his temples and whispered, "Dear God." Camilla tried to calm him. "He's emotional, Charles." He didn't mean it literally. But Charles shook his head. "No, you don't say that on live television unless you mean it. He's broken, but he's not stupid." Meanwhile, William paced the room, his jaw clenched. He's gone too far this time. He's dragging the family through hell because he can't handle his own mistakes. An aide interrupted, handing William a tablet. "Sir, there's something else. Look at this." On the screen was a clip that hadn't made it to broadcast, behind-the-scenes footage captured by a studio crew's phone. It showed Meghan turning to Harry, whispering furiously, "Stop it. You'll destroy us both." Charles slammed the table. "Us both? What does that mean?" The room went quiet. Across London, royal correspondents scrambled to make sense of it all. The BBC held an emergency editorial meeting, trying to decide how much of the interview could be legally aired in full. Tabloids were already publishing front-page mock-ups. One headline read, "Prince of Pain, Harry's Tears of Betrayal." Another said simply, "The biggest royal scandal since Diana." The public was divided. Some sympathized with Harry, a man pushed too far by lies and manipulation. Others accused him of treason, of destroying what little dignity the royal family had left. But amid the noise, one detail caught everyone's attention: the phrase, "living a lie." What lie was he referring to? Was it about Meghan? The monarchy? The children? Palace aides didn't know what to believe. For months, they'd whispered about strange irregularities surrounding Archie and Lillibet's births. But no one dared put anything in writing. The royal machine thrived on silence, the kind that could bury even the loudest truth. That night, an urgent call was made to Kensington Palace. William was ordered to stay quiet. "No statements, no reactions," said an advisor. "We must assess the damage first." But William couldn't stay still. He called Harry again and again. No answer. He texted, "For God's sake, What are you doing? Think about the children. Still nothing. Back in California, Harry sat by the ocean, phone buzzing relentlessly. His publicist called. His lawyer called. Even Oprah called. But he ignored them all. The only person he wanted to hear from was silent, Meghan. He replayed the interview in his head, every word echoing like a curse. They're not mine. What had he done? Was he free now? Or had he just destroyed his life? He didn't know. All he knew was that the truth was finally out, and somehow, he felt both lighter and lonelier than ever before. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message, same unknown number. Check your email. You'll understand everything. Harry hesitated. His heart raced as he opened his laptop and logged in. There it was, a single new message with an attachment labeled Confidential Lineage File. The sender's name was blocked. No subject line, just one sentence in the body. This is what they didn't want you to see. He hesitated, finger hovering over the mouse. A part of him didn't want to know, but curiosity, fear, and the faint hope that maybe this could explain everything drove him to click. The document opened with a royal crest watermark. Inside were dozens of pages of names, dates, and medical entries. Some redacted, others marked classified. At the bottom of the first page, a chilling note read, "Maternal genetics source, unverified." Harry's hands trembled. He scrolled further. The entries for Archie and Lillibet were inconsistent. Their medical files were listed under pseudonyms. The attending physician's signature was missing. And in the margin, handwritten in faded ink, were two words that sent his stomach plunging: borrowed placement. He read it again and again. Borrowed placement. What did that even mean? He called the number from the text, but it was disconnected. His mind raced. Who had sent this? A palace insider? A doctor? Someone trying to help, or to destroy him completely? By morning, every major news outlet was running wall-to-wall coverage of his breakdown. Satellite trucks lined the road near Montecito. Photographers camped outside the gates. The headlines grew crueler by the hour. Harry's delusion or Meghan's deception. Inside the palace, damage control intensified. Charles's advisors drafted an official statement. "The royal family stands by the Duke and Duchess during this difficult time," it read. But when Charles saw the draft, he tore it in half. "No," he said sharply. "We don't stand by lies." He turned to one of his aides. "I want every record checked. Every file. If there's something to this madness, I want to know before the world does." Meanwhile, Meghan's team worked frantically from Los Angeles, calling in favors from streaming executives, PR strategists, and sympathetic journalists. She released a short statement to TMZ. Harry's comments were taken out of context. "We ask for privacy as our family heals." But the damage was far beyond control. Privacy was impossible when your confession was the most replayed clip in the world. Behind closed doors, Meghan was furious. Sources close to her claimed she accused Harry of betraying everything we built. She reportedly smashed her phone during an argument, yelling that he's ruined everything. But Harry wasn't there to defend himself. He had left Montecito hours earlier, driving north along the California coast, desperate for answers. He stopped at a small gas station just outside Santa Barbara. The clerk recognized him immediately. The red hair, the haunted look. "Hey, you okay, man?" the clerk asked. Harry just nodded faintly. "Do you believe people can love you and lie to you at the same time?" he asked quietly. The clerk hesitated. "Yeah, happens all the time." Harry smiled sadly. "Yeah, I guess it does." He bought a coffee, sat in his car, and stared at the ocean for hours. The waves crashed against the rocks, cold and relentless. Every sound reminded him of his mother, the ocean she loved, the silence that followed her death, the lies that were told about her. He wondered if Diana had felt this same isolation, this same ache of betrayal. Back in London, the royal family's inner circle scrambled to find a scapegoat. Some blamed Meghan, others blamed American media, and a few even blamed Diana's ghost, the ever-present reminder that truth and tragedy often came hand in hand. But William wasn't looking for someone to blame. He was looking for his brother. He knew that behind the anger and confusion, Harry was still the same kid who used to follow him through palace corridors, always looking for approval, always searching for meaning. But now, that boy was lost. Late that night, William made one more attempt. He sent a single text. "Whatever you think you've found, don't face it alone." Harry read it, but didn't reply. He couldn't, because at that exact moment, his phone buzzed again, another message from the unknown sender. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a video file. The name read, July 2019, delivery room feed. He froze. July 2019. Archie's birth month. He clicked the file, and what appeared on his screen made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't a hospital room. It wasn't even London. It was a private villa, somewhere tropical, with palm trees visible through the window. A group of people stood around a crib. A woman, not Meghan, held a newborn in her arms. The timestamp matched Archie's birth date. Harry felt the blood drain from his face. The woman looked vaguely familiar, but her identity was hidden by a surgical mask. Someone behind the camera said softly, "We'll deliver him to the couple within the hour. Everything's been arranged." And then, the video cut out. Harry sat frozen, heart pounding, trying to process what he had just seen. His whole world tilted on its axis. Was this real? Was it a cruel fabrication? He didn't know, but the name of the file, the timestamp, and the familiar background left little doubt in his mind. He looked out at the Pacific horizon, the sky glowing faintly pink with dawn. The wind howled against the car windows. He whispered to himself, "What have they done?" He didn't know who they were anymore, Meghan, the palace, or the invisible forces that had manipulated his entire life. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. He had to find out the truth, no matter what it cost. Because if the video was real, then his confession wasn't a mistake. It was the first step toward exposing something much darker. And that was when he realized the question that had shattered the palace wasn't just, "How have your children changed you?" It was everything that question unleashed, every secret it cracked open, every lie it forced into the light. But what came next would make even that confession look small. Because deep within palace archives, one document was about to resurface. One that connected Meghan's mysterious medical trips, missing hospital logs, and the chilling phrase, borrowed placement. And when that document reached Harry's hands, the truth about Archie's birth would finally begin to unfold, and the monarchy would never recover from it. The palace is a place built on tradition, protocol, and silence. Every corridor guard, every ceremonial room is steeped in centuries of unspoken rules. Secrets don't just exist here, they thrive. And when Prince Harry's televised confession hit the airwaves, those secrets started to move like shadows across the marble floors. Even before the world had fully grasped his words, the palace's whisper network, the web of aides, stewards, footmen, and confidential staff, began buzzing. These were people who knew the inner workings of the monarchy better than anyone. They were the keepers of knowledge that would never appear in public records. People who had seen the cracks in the royal facade long before Harry had broken under them. The first whispers began at 7:32 p.m. local time, just minutes after the interview aired. An anonymous footman passed a note to his secretary. "Duke's children, something is off. Need verification." The secretary, already aware of the growing chaos, didn't read it. She filed it under sensitive, knowing that anyone else seeing it could be in serious trouble. By the next hour, aides were quietly exchanging emails, encrypted messages hinting at inconsistencies in the records of both Archie and Lillibet. Inside the private quarters, Charles paced like a caged lion. Every now and then, he stopped mid-step, staring at the ornate walls as though they might answer his questions. He had spent decades navigating scandals, controlling narratives, and keeping the monarchy's reputation intact. But this was different. The whispers weren't just rumors. They were coming from people who had access to the deepest archives, who had seen the documents and the inconsistencies that had always been carefully hidden. One of his closest advisors, a woman who had served the royal household for decades, leaned over the desk and whispered urgently, "Sir, the files for both children, they don't line up. There are redactions, missing signatures, and dates that don't match hospital logs." Charles froze. "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "Yes, sir," she said, her voice barely audible. "There's a reason Harry's breaking down. Something has been covered up for years." Meanwhile, whispers moved like smoke through the palace staff. In the kitchens, the head chef overheard two housekeepers debating why Archie's christening documents were never signed by the usual registrar. In the laundry room, A footman mentioned seeing Lillibet's medical records moved from the official file cabinet to a private storage unit. In corridors normally bustling with preparation for state dinners, murmurs replaced footsteps as staff passed along fragments of evidence, building a network of suspicion that had no leader but was entirely cohesive. Some of the whispers were almost instinctive. Palace employees knew patterns, what should be present in a child's birth file, who should be informed, which documents required witness signatures. The fact that these protocols had been bypassed repeatedly set off alarm bells. The network was quiet, careful, but relentless. By the following morning, the palace's internal communications team had compiled a preliminary report. It listed anomalies like missing or redacted medical certificates, unexplained security measures around hospital visits, and cryptic references in digital logs indicating restricted access to the children's records. A footnote read, "Potential familial misrepresentation, verification required." The phrase alone was enough to make even seasoned advisors uneasy. In a small office tucked behind the Queen's former private study, one senior aide pulled a stack of documents labeled confidential, do not duplicate. These files contained internal correspondence, travel itineraries, and hospital records, or what was supposed to be hospital records. The aide scanned the pages, noting discrepancies. Some entries were incomplete, signatures were missing, and timestamps contradicted other official documentation. The conclusion was impossible to ignore. Something about Archie and Lillibet's early months didn't match up with standard palace protocols. Staff who had worked with the couple for years whispered privately about odd behaviors. A former nanny noted that Meghan had requested certain rooms be off-limits, and only select aides could enter, even during hospital visits. A midwife who had worked on high-profile births claimed she had been asked to leave medical logs incomplete. The whispers painted a picture of secrecy that went far beyond the couple's public privacy. The palace communications team tried to suppress information, but the whisper network was organic. Emails sent with top-level security markings were forwarded cautiously. Conversations were held in empty corridors, and coded phrases emerged. Placement verification, unverified maternity, and temporary custody. Even among staff, the terminology was chilling, suggesting that someone had manipulated records to maintain appearances, and the children's true origins were obscured. By midday, one footman who had been with the family for decades walked into an empty break room and muttered to a colleague, "If Harry's saying what I think he's saying, this is bigger than anything Diana went through." The colleague nodded silently. Both knew the implications. Lineage, legitimacy, and royal succession were not just abstract concepts in the palace. They were the backbone of authority, and any compromise could have historic consequences. Across the palace, advisors debated whether to inform Charles immediately. Some argued that Harry's emotional state might distort the facts, that he could be exaggerating or misinterpreting evidence. Others insisted the king needed to know immediately. "We have to verify the children's records," one senior aide said, "or risk a disaster that no PR team can fix." The palace IT department was tasked with tracing all electronic records for Archie and Lillibet. They discovered files that had been created, modified, and even deleted at unusual hours. IP addresses were traced to locations that were inconsistent with the couple's known residences. Metadata suggested that some records had been edited on devices belonging to third parties. Outsiders with connections to the couple's private security team. Meanwhile, whispers spread to the palace's most trusted private physicians. One doctor, who had assisted with previous royal births, was reportedly contacted by another aide and asked bluntly, "Have you ever seen records like these? Do you recognize these patients?" The physician's response was telling, "No, these aren't standard records. Something has been altered." All this was happening while the public remained mostly unaware of the magnitude of the crisis. Tabloids covered the meltdown. Social media dissected Harry's facial expressions, and pundits debated Meghan's role. But inside the palace, the Whisper Network was building a dossier, page by page, whisper by whisper, evidence by evidence. Staff who had once been silenced by fear were now speaking up cautiously. They were piecing together a story that the monarchy had long avoided. One that suggested Archie and Lillibet might not have been born under the circumstances the public believed. And that realization sent ripples through every level of the palace. Advisors began questioning who could be trusted. Security protocols were tightened. Senior staff were summoned for confidential briefings. The Whisper Network had evolved from passive observation into coordinated investigation, and the unease was palpable. One aide, speaking anonymously, later described the atmosphere. You could feel it in the air. Everyone knew something wasn't right. The silence that had once protected the monarchy now felt like a cage. People were afraid, yes, but also determined. They had to know the truth, no matter the risk. By evening, Charles reportedly convened a private meeting with William and senior aides. The conversation was tense. William pressed for transparency. We need the full picture before we respond. Harry's tears may be emotional, but this goes deeper. Charles, though usually measured, admitted he felt betrayed. I raised him to value honesty. If this is true, someone has manipulated our family in ways I cannot yet imagine. And amidst all this, Harry remained hundreds of miles away, unaware that the Whisper Network was closing in. Each murmur, each document, each secret acknowledgement by palace staff was bringing the reality closer to the surface. The truth was moving, slow, quiet, unstoppable, and it was only a matter of time before it collided with his confession. But the most startling discovery was yet to come. Deep within the palace archives, behind layers of security, one file had remained untouched for decades. It was marked simply, restricted lineage verification. Few had ever seen it. Fewer still knew its contents. And the moment that file emerged, every whisper, every suspicion, every hushed conversation would suddenly make sense, and the implications for Archie and Lillibet would be undeniable. Because what the palace staff had been whispering for months was not rumor. It was fact, and the truth, when finally unearthed, would shake the monarchy to its core. And that's when one aide realized the unthinkable. Some of the information in those Whisper networks pointed to something Harry could never have imagined, a hidden arrangement that involved more than secrecy. It involved deception at the highest levels, manipulation of records, and decisions made far beyond the couple's control. The Whisper Network had grown beyond gossip. It had become a roadmap, a guide to a truth that no one in the palace wanted to confront. And that truth would soon lead to the vanishing records, the missing doctors, and the ultimate revelation of Archie and Lillibet's origins. But what came next would go deeper than whispers. It would expose the skeletons that had long been buried, and force Harry to confront secrets he hadn't yet imagined. The term, vanishing records, doesn't sound particularly threatening at first. It evokes a mundane bureaucratic error, a misfiled paper, a forgotten email. But in the context of Buckingham Palace, it meant something far more sinister. Every file, every signature, every medical note was part of a meticulously maintained chain of verification, a chain that guaranteed the legitimacy of everything from royal births to succession rights. When those records disappeared, so too did certainty. It started subtly. A nurse's log for Archie's birth was misfiled. A medical signature for Lillibet's delivery was missing. Initial reports dismissed it as human error. Perhaps someone had misplaced a document during the chaos of hospital visits. But as the whispers grew louder inside the palace, more discrepancies began to surface. Footnotes were missing from key reports. Official timestamps contradicted diary entries from attending staff. Even the simplest documents, the ones that should have been mundane confirmations of birth, had been altered, redacted, or removed entirely. Prince Harry first noticed it in early 2022 when he requested copies of Archie's and Lillibet's hospital files. The staff, already under tension, handed him a series of incomplete records. Some pages were missing. Others were clearly retyped, with handwriting that seemed inconsistent with official notations. Asterisks indicated footnotes that were nowhere to be found. When he asked about it, a senior aide smiled faintly and said, "We'll find them." But no one did. The vanishing records weren't limited to hospital files. Travel documents mysteriously omitted certain trips, particularly ones surrounding the children's early weeks. Photographs existed, but metadata revealed inconsistencies. Timestamps didn't match the claimed locations. Invitations to private family events listed children in attendance, but palace logs didn't corroborate it. Everything seemed designed to maintain appearances while hiding something deeper. Meanwhile, staff who had been with the family for decades began speaking quietly, almost in code. One former nanny admitted, under the condition of anonymity, that she had noticed unusual instructions. Some nights, we were told to prepare the nursery, but not to bring the children. We'd ask why, and no one would answer. Then certain staff would quietly switch the records before anyone could see them. It wasn't just the documentation that raised alarms. Certain personnel associated with the births vanished shortly after their supposed duties. A nurse who had been present for Lillibet's delivery was reassigned overseas without explanation. A doctor with access to sensitive files retired abruptly, citing personal reasons, but friends noted he was visibly unsettled. These disappearances coincided eerily with gaps in the official records, leading palace insiders to suspect a coordinated effort to obscure the truth. By mid-2023, Harry had pieced together enough fragments to realize the extent of the problem. There were entire sequences of events that couldn't be verified. Who was present at the births, who signed the necessary medical documentation, which hospital rooms were used, and even where the children were during critical early moments. It wasn't a single error, it was a pattern, consistent and deliberate. At the same time, the Palace Archive team discovered a series of documents labeled sensitive that had been moved from the main registry to a secure, restricted access vault. These files were hidden behind layers of digital encryption, and only a handful of people knew they existed. When questioned about them, staff claimed they were standard protocol for high-profile births, but internal notes contradicted this. Handwritten annotations suggested the files contained irregularities, mismatched dates, unauthorized signatures, and cryptic remarks such as alternate custody verification and temporary placement. One particularly troubling discovery came from a set of digital logs tracking hospital visits. According to the metadata, some records had been accessed from IP addresses outside the United Kingdom, including locations in California and a private villa in Portugal. Forensic analysis indicated that files had been copied, modified, and sometimes deleted at odd hours. This suggested deliberate tampering, not accidental misfiling. Harry's emotional turmoil escalated as he compared these vanishing records with his own experiences. He recalled moments during the early weeks of Archie's life when access to him was restricted, appointments he was unaware of, caregivers who insisted on secrecy, and instructions from Meghan that seemed unusual. When combined with the missing documents, it painted a picture he couldn't ignore. Something about his children's early life had been hidden from him, deliberately and systematically. The palace staff tried to mitigate the internal panic. Some claimed the gaps were due to heightened security measures, meant to protect the family from media intrusion. Others argued that the inconsistencies were merely bureaucratic oversights. But when multiple trusted aides started sharing information independently, a clearer pattern emerged. Files didn't just vanish. They were being actively moved, modified, or destroyed. The situation became more alarming when a former aide revealed an internal memo he had discovered months earlier. The memo outlined a procedure for temporary custody verification, referencing children using code names and pseudonyms. It implied that certain children, identified only by initials, could be placed temporarily in the care of approved staff without leaving any trace in the official records. The implications were chilling. Could this mean that Harry and Meghan's children had, at least temporarily, been in the care of others? Or worse, had the children themselves been switched at some point? While Harry wrestled with these questions, palace security was already moving. CCTV footage was pulled for review. Staff schedules were scrutinized. Every visit, every handoff, every caretaker involved in the early months was cataloged. In some cases, staff admitted they couldn't remember what they had done, a result of deliberate instructions to forget certain procedures. The term vanishing records had taken on a literal meaning. It wasn't just documentation that disappeared. The events themselves had been engineered to leave no evidence. The emotional impact on Harry was devastating. For a man who had spent years defending his family, protecting their privacy, and maintaining the public image of a modern royal household, discovering that key aspects of his children's lives were shrouded in secrecy felt like a betrayal of the highest order. He had trusted the system, the monarchy, the staff, and even his own instincts. Now, all of that trust seemed misplaced. Yet Harry remained determined. He began compiling his own records, dates, times, and events as he remembered them. He cross-referenced them with media reports, photographs, and occasional staff testimony. Every discrepancy fueled his resolve. He couldn't stop asking the same question over and over. What had happened during those early weeks of Archie's and Lillibet's lives that was so important it had to be hidden? The vanishing records weren't just administrative failures. They were a symptom of a larger, more insidious effort to conceal the truth. And as Harry delved deeper, he realized the scope extended far beyond missing documents. It involved people, institutions, and systems designed to maintain appearances at any cost. By the time he had reviewed all the evidence, Harry had reached a horrifying conclusion. The inconsistencies were not accidents. They were deliberate. Someone, somewhere, had manipulated the records and controlled access to ensure that the truth about his children remained hidden. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, a junior archivist who had been quietly tracking anomalies in the digital record system. She approached Harry with a folder marked Private, Confidential, and whispered, "You need to see this before it's moved again." Inside were detailed notes about missing entries, altered birth logs, and unusual custody arrangements, all tied to the early months of Archie and Lillibet's lives. The term temporary placement appeared repeatedly, each time with a different set of initials. Harry stared at the folder, heart pounding. This was it. The confirmation that the vanishing records were part of a deliberate effort to obscure the truth. Every doubt he had, every whisper he had ignored, every instinct telling him something was wrong, was now validated. And yet, even with this evidence in hand, the full picture remained incomplete. Names were redacted. Dates were unclear. The documents hinted at a story, but they didn't reveal it in its entirety. Someone still controlled the narrative. Someone still had the power to conceal the final pieces. And that someone, Harry realized with a sinking feeling, was much closer than he had imagined. Because the vanishing records were not just about bureaucracy. They were about control, manipulation, and the ultimate secret behind Archie and Lillibet. A secret that, if revealed, could change the monarchy forever. But what came next would expose even deeper mysteries. Secret meetings, hidden conversations, and the first hints of Meghan's role in orchestrating the silence. The world saw Meghan Markle as poised, graceful, and controlled, a woman who seemed to navigate every public appearance with ease, charm, and perfection. But behind closed doors, away from the cameras, the story was far more complex. Those who worked with her closely whispered of late-night meetings, encrypted calls, and a level of secrecy that rivaled any intelligence operation. And for Prince Harry, discovering the extent of these secret meetings was a shock that threatened to upend everything he thought he knew about his family. It began subtly. Staff noticed that certain rooms within the couple's Montecito estate were off-limits, even to those with top clearance. Housekeepers and aides were sometimes redirected, told that meetings were confidential or sensitive, with vague instructions to report nothing. Meghan's team insisted it was for privacy, but the pattern of secrecy raised eyebrows. Insiders claimed that she had meetings scheduled at odd hours, often starting late at night and running into the early morning. These gatherings were attended only by a small circle of trusted aides, legal advisors, and sometimes individuals whose identities were not officially recorded. The topics were never disclosed, and any notes taken during the meetings were reportedly shredded or stored in heavily encrypted files. One staff member, speaking under anonymity, recounted an incident during early 2021. "I was asked to prepare a room for a late meeting," they said. "It wasn't for a charity or business call. It was something different. There were files brought in, laptops encrypted, and a woman I had never seen before." Meghan gave instructions quietly, but firmly. The tone, it was serious. Not the usual public relations planning. Something was happening behind the scenes that no one outside that room was meant to know. Harry noticed the pattern himself. Meetings that he thought would include him were suddenly rescheduled or canceled without explanation. He would see her speaking in hushed tones on her phone, often in another room, ending calls abruptly when he entered. Sometimes he could catch fragments of words, timing, placement, arrangements, before Meghan would hang up or switch to another topic. At first, he chalked it up to professional stress. But as months passed, unease grew. The secrecy intensified during key moments of the children's early lives. Insiders recalled that when Meghan was pregnant with Lillibet, she frequently had private consultations with medical staff that Harry was told not to attend. Security logs showed unusual patterns, new staff members arriving at odd hours, some of whom had no previous record with the family. The combination of restricted access, new personnel, and secretive meetings created an atmosphere of tension, even among the household staff. One particularly revealing account came from a private consultant hired to manage the couple's security. They reported that certain individuals arrived under the cover of darkness, carrying medical equipment or documents. Their interactions were brief, and they left before Harry was aware of their presence. According to the consultant, these visits seemed coordinated with Meghan's schedule, and she directed every interaction personally. It wasn't just privacy, the consultant later told a journalist. It was orchestration. Encrypted communications also played a role. Meghan reportedly relied on messaging apps with high-level encryption for discussions that involved sensitive family matters. Staff described overhearing snippets of these conversations, mentions of surrogates, arrangements, and verification processes, but details were always obscured. When Harry attempted to access any of the information, he was met with excuses or firm refusals. The secrecy was total. Even legal advisors were involved in the confidential process. One insider revealed that multiple lawyers coordinated remotely, ensuring that certain documents and agreements were hidden from Harry's view. Contracts were drafted under the guise of privacy and protection for the children, but they contained clauses that limited Harry's access to critical information. Staff began referring to this as the legal blackout, a period during which Meghan maintained strict control over what was disclosed to anyone, including her husband. Friends of Harry noticed the emotional toll these secret meetings had on him. He became restless, one source said. He'd try to ask questions, and Meghan would deflect, or the room would go quiet. He started spending nights alone, pacing the villa, thinking about what could be happening behind those closed doors. He became withdrawn from staff and friends, avoiding casual conversations that might trigger more stress. It was like he was trying to piece together a puzzle that wasn't meant for him to see, the source added. Meanwhile, the palace and media began noticing patterns that correlated with the couple's private activity. Trips and hospital visits had unexplained gaps, and photographs circulated online that seemed staged or inconsistent with official timelines. Observers questioned why certain images of Archie and Lillibet were limited to specific angles and why official statements about births and early milestones seemed vague or delayed. To the palace, these inconsistencies were red flags. To Harry, they were evidence of a deeper deception that was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. The secret meetings also had an emotional dimension. Meghan reportedly used these gatherings to discuss sensitive family matters with advisors, sometimes in the presence of staff who were sworn to secrecy. Discussions reportedly included managing appearances for media outlets, verifying timelines for public events, and even rehearsing explanations for potential inquiries into the children's early lives. Staff described her tone as intense but focused, leaving little room for deviation from the plan. It wasn't only the secrecy that alarmed Harry. It was the content of what he began to learn. Insiders indicated that the meetings sometimes involved surrogate arrangements and alternative placements, highly confidential processes meant to protect the family's image. While details remained sketchy, there were repeated mentions of temporary custody, controlled access, and timing of the children's appearances in public. The pattern suggested a deliberate effort to control both perception and information. And Harry had been largely excluded from it. By late 2022, Harry's frustration reached a boiling point. Staff confirmed that meetings continued even when he was present in the villa. He confronted Meghan directly, asking for transparency. She responded with calm but firm insistence on privacy. "This is about protecting the children," she told him. "You'll understand when the time comes." Harry left those conversations unsettled, sensing that something critical was being withheld, and that the stakes were higher than he had imagined. The pattern culminated in a meeting that Harry was not invited to, a meeting reportedly held in early 2023 with a small group of advisors, intermediaries, and unknown individuals. According to palace insiders, The agenda included verification processes for both children, adjustments to official records, and strategies to manage any potential inquiries from external authorities. The level of secrecy was extreme. Staff were instructed to leave the premises entirely during the discussion, and any documentation was encrypted immediately.